I never thought I'd see my father in handcuffs, but let me start from the beginning. 3 months ago, before everything fell apart, I was Emma Parker, CFO of Parker Industries, one of the largest construction companies on the West Coast. My father, Robert Parker, had built the company from nothing, turning a small contracting business into a $2 billion enterprise. At least that's what I thought. The first red flag appeared during a routine audit of our government contracts division. Numbers that didn't quite add up. Cost reports that seemed oddly inflated. Small discrepancies that most people would miss. But I wasn't most people. Dad had insisted I study accounting and finance, pushing me to get my MBA from Stanford before joining the family business. Always watch the numbers, Emma, he told me countless times. Numbers tell the real story. How ironic that his own advice would lead to his downfall. You're being paranoid, Marcus, our chief legal officer, told me when I first raised my concerns. These are complex contracts. Some variation is normal. But it wasn't just variation. The more I dug, the more patterns emerged. Construction materials that cost 40% above market rate. Subcontractors that existed only on paper. Labor costs that didn't match our actual workforce. I tried talking to Dad about it first, of course. Family loyalty demanded that much. Daddy, I'd said during our weekly dinner at his mansion overlooking the Pacific, I found some irregularities in the government contracts. We should review them before the annual audit. He barely looked up from his Wagyu steak. It's nothing, sweetheart. Just standard industry practices. Focus on the new development projects instead. But I couldn't let it go. The numbers kept nagging at me. Late at night, after everyone had left the office, I started digging deeper. That's when I found the first encrypted file. It was buried in our financial system, hidden behind layers of security that had no business being in a construction company's accounting software. Using the skills I'd learned from our audit department during system upgrades, I managed to crack it. What I found made my blood run cold. Fake invoices, shell companies, a complex web of financial transactions designed to inflate costs on government contracts while hiding the excess profits in offshore accounts. The scope was staggering. Over the past decade, Parker Industries had overcharged the government by more than $400 million. And my father's signature was on everything. I spent the next week gathering evidence, carefully documenting every fraudulent transaction, every fake company, every illegal payment. I encrypted it all on a special USB drive, one that could only be accessed with my biometric data. Then I made the mistake of trying to give my father one last chance. Dad, I said, walking into his corner office with its panoramic view of the city, we need to talk about what I found. He looked up from his computer, his expression unreadable. And what exactly did you find, Emma? I laid out the evidence, the fake invoices, the shell companies, the offshore accounts. With each detail, his face grew harder, colder. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he pressed a button on his desk phone. Security, please come to my office. My heart stopped. Dad? He stood up, straightening his custom-made suit. I'm very disappointed, Emma. I thought you understood how business works in the real world. Fraud isn't business, Dad. This is serious. We need to come clean. Make it right. Make it right? He laughed, but there was no warmth in it. Do you have any idea how many people depend on this company? Thousands of employees, their families? And you want to throw it all away because of some creative accounting? The security team arrived. 3 men I'd known for years. They looked uncomfortable. Emma Parker is no longer employed by Parker Industries, my father announced. Please escort her from the building. Standard terminated employee protocols. I couldn't believe what was happening. Dad, please. And make sure she doesn't take any company property with her, he added, eyeing my laptop bag. What he didn't know was that I'd anticipated this possibility. The USB drive with the evidence was in a hidden pocket, while a decoy drive sat obviously in my laptop bag. As security led me out, I saw Marcus watching from his office, his expression a mix of pity and warning. He'd known, I realized. They'd all known. The next hour was a blur of humiliation. My email access cut off. My phone wiped remotely. My personal belongings boxed up under supervision. In the lobby, Jim, the head of security, handed me my box of belongings. I'm sorry, Emma, he whispered. Your father, he said you had a breakdown, that you were making wild accusations. I managed a smile. It's okay, Jim, just doing your job. My hand touched the hidden pocket where the USB drive sat. Dad had taught me well, always have a backup plan. Outside, I called the one person I knew I could trust. David Chen, my old roommate from Stanford, now a federal prosecutor specializing in white-collar crime. David, remember when you said I could call you if I ever needed help? I need help. And I have evidence of massive government contract fraud. His response was immediate. Where can we meet? The coffee shop on 4th Street, the one with no security cameras. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Emma, be careful. People who commit this kind of fraud, even family. I know, I said, watching my father's office window high above. Believe me, I know. The sun was setting over the city as I walked away from Parker Industries, the company I'd grown up in, the legacy I thought I would inherit. In my father's office, I could see him on the phone, probably already spinning the story of his unstable daughter making baseless accusations. He thought he'd won, thought he'd silence me. But Dad had taught me one more lesson he'd forgotten. Numbers tell the real story. And tomorrow, when the FBI's forensic accountants saw the numbers I found, the real story would finally come out. I just hoped I'd survive what came next. Because one thing was certain, Robert Parker wouldn't go down without a fight. And he had a lot more to lose than just money. The FBI moves surprisingly fast when you have solid evidence of $400 million in government contract fraud. By 6 a.m. the next morning, teams of agents were simultaneously raiding Parker Industries offices across 3 states. I watched from David's car as they entered our headquarters, carrying boxes and hard drives that would confirm everything I'd discovered. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the news broke. Employees, business partners, family friends, everyone wanted answers. I ignored them all, except for one message from Marcus, our chief legal officer. You actually did it. God help us all. Dad's response was exactly what I'd expected. By 9 a.m., his PR team was in full swing, painting me as a disgruntled ex-employee making baseless accusations. By noon, his lawyers had filed for an emergency injunction to stop the investigation, claiming I'd stolen proprietary information. But numbers don't lie, and I'd learned from the best how to document everything. Your father's good, David said, reviewing the evidence with his team. The fraud was sophisticated, layered. Without your inside knowledge of the company's systems, we might never have caught it. I felt sick. He taught me everything I know about finance. Was this what he was grooming me for all along? To help him hide his crimes? The next week was chaos. The investigation expanded as more evidence emerged. It wasn't just government contracts. Dad had been running similar schemes with private projects too. Shell companies, kickbacks, inflated costs, all hidden behind a maze of legitimate-looking transactions. Then came the threats. First subtle, through family friends. Emma, dear, think about what this will do to your father's legacy. Then more direct, from Dad's business associates. You have no idea what you're getting into, girl. Finally, a brick through my apartment window with a simple note. Stop now. I moved into a safe house under FBI protection. David assigned 2 agents to watch me 24/7. Your father's desperate, he explained. The evidence is overwhelming, but he still has powerful friends. He was right. Dad's network ran deep in the city's power structure. Judges suddenly became unavailable for warrants. Local officials dragged their feet on document requests. Even some FBI agents seemed reluctant to push too hard. But Dad had forgotten something important. I was a Parker too, and he taught me well. While the FBI worked through the evidence I provided, I kept digging. Every night, I worked with federal forensic accountants explaining the company's systems, revealing hidden connections. Each discovery led to more evidence, more conspirators, more fraud. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Jim, our head of security, contacted me through David. Miss Emma, he said when we met in a secure location, there's something you need to see. He handed me a hard drive. Your father has a private server in his house. After you were fired, he ordered me to wipe it. I made a copy first. The data on that drive broke the case wide open. Not only did it confirm the fraud, but it also revealed something even worse. My father had been falsifying safety inspections on government buildings. My God, David whispered as we reviewed the files. Schools, hospitals, military facilities, He cut corners on structural integrity to increase profits. That's when I knew there could be no turning back. This wasn't just about money anymore. Lives were at risk. The next morning, I went public, a press conference arranged by the U.S. Attorney's Office, with me standing at the podium facing dozens of reporters. My name is Emma Parker. I began, my voice steady despite my trembling hands, and I'm here to tell you the truth about Parker Industries. For the next hour, I laid out everything: the fraud schemes, the safety violations, the web of corruption that had turned my family's company into a criminal enterprise. As I spoke, FBI agents were executing new search warrants. Dad's mansion, his vacation homes, the private islands where he'd hosted politicians and business leaders. The evidence was overwhelming. That evening, I watched from David's office as federal agents led my father out of Parker Industries in handcuffs. He looked smaller somehow, his expensive suit wrinkled, his confident swagger gone. He saw me watching. Our eyes met through the glass. For a moment, I saw something in his face. Not anger or betrayal, but something like recognition, as if he was finally seeing me clearly for the first time. Then he was gone, into the waiting FBI vehicle. The aftermath was both better and worse than I'd expected. Better because once the truth came out, support poured in from unexpected places. Employees who'd suspected something was wrong but had been afraid to speak up. Competitors who'd lost contracts to our fraudulent bids. Government officials who'd tried to investigate but had been blocked by Dad's influence. Worse because the damage was even more extensive than I'd known. The company's legitimate projects were tainted by association. Thousands of jobs were at risk. Buildings had to be re-inspected, contracts renegotiated, entire projects scrapped and rebuilt. But I had a plan for that too. Working with David and the federal prosecutors, I proposed a solution. Parker Industries would be reorganized under new management, with strict oversight and transparency measures. The legitimate parts of the business would be preserved, saving jobs and projects. Dad's hidden assets would be seized to pay for repairs and restitution. The offshore accounts I discovered held more than enough to make things right. Most importantly, every building we constructed would be thoroughly inspected and, if necessary, reinforced or rebuilt at our expense. It's not just about making amends, I told the board of directors, now mostly composed of court-appointed trustees. It's about rebuilding trust, showing that Parker Industries can be something more than my father's crimes. It took months of work, countless meetings, and endless negotiations. But slowly the company began to transform. We instituted new oversight systems, bringing in external auditors and creating an independent ethics board. I worked directly with government investigators, helping them understand how the fraud had worked so they could prevent similar schemes in the future. 1 year after the raid, I stood in my old office, now my office again, but as the new CEO of the reorganized Parker Industries. The view was the same, but everything else had changed. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Marcus, our former chief legal officer, now working with the prosecution in exchange for leniency. "Your father wants to see you," he said quietly. Before the sentencing, I'd known this moment would come. Dad faced decades in prison, his empire dismantled, his reputation destroyed. The prison meeting room was stark and cold. Dad sat there in his orange jumpsuit, looking aged and tired. "You did well," he said as I sat down. "Better than I ever taught you." "You taught me to follow the numbers," I replied, "to never ignore what they were telling me." He smiled slightly. "I did. I just never thought you'd use those lessons against me. Not against you, Dad, against what you did. Against what you became." He was silent for a long moment. "The company, how is it?" "Recovering. We're doing things right now. Actually helping people instead of just pretending to." "And you? How are you?" I met his eyes. "I'm my father's daughter. I'm building something too. Just something different than what you built." Understanding passed between us. He nodded slowly. "I'm proud of you, Emma," he said finally, "even if this isn't how I wanted it to happen." I stood up to leave. At the door, I turned back. "Dad, the numbers always tell the real story. That's what you taught me. And now they're telling a new story, one about redemption, about doing things right." He smiled sadly. "Then make it a good story, Emma. Better than mine." Walking out of the prison that day, I felt the weight of both the past and the future. The company was recovering, transforming into something my father had never imagined. A force for good, for real progress, for honest work. The headlines had changed too. From Parker Industries fraud scandal to Parker Industries leads industry reform. From daughter betrays father's empire to whistleblower rebuilds company's legacy. Sometimes late at night, working in my office, I look at Dad's old photos on the wall. The young contractor who dreamed of building something great. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of what great really meant. But his final lesson, his biggest lesson, was one he never meant to teach me. Sometimes building something means tearing down what came before. Sometimes loyalty to what's right matters more than loyalty to family. And sometimes the greatest legacy a father can leave is teaching his daughter how to stand up against him when he's wrong. The new Parker Industries isn't perfect, but it's honest, it's real, and every day we work to make it better. That's a story worth telling. That's a legacy worth building.